We've got Notre Dame going to Chapel Hill this Friday. I am glad to hear that since I've had it circled all season, that somebody else a little closer to the action and a little closer to his heart has had it circled, maybe for a different reason. Got John Kennedy on the line from Always Irish to talk Notre Dame football. John, how you doing tonight?
Very well. Thanks for having me. Happy Thanksgiving, Mark.
Happy Thanksgiving to you as well, and yours. So, yeah, when Notre Dame was proclaimed to be eligible for an ACC championship, and considering past the Clemson game, of course, that was the one that was in dark marker for everyone. Beyond that, that North Carolina game certainly came to mind for me, and just the intriguing setting of Thanksgiving weekend on a Friday in Chapel Hill, and much anticipated in regards to North Carolina's ascension through the ranks of the ACC. Much has been accomplished by them, although they've tripped up a few times. So you're going into this one a bit shaky.
It's been circled from the beginning. Okay, as soon as you could identify it right away. So I can assure you one thing that's not going to happen is any Notre Dame fan or people who do what I do, there's no such thing as overlooking this game. I think it's cheap to call it a trap game because it's so trappy. It's no longer a trap. Okay, there's a lot of factors here that I didn't like from day one before the season even started. On the road is always something to think about. On a Friday, I don't like that once you start messing with the routines. Day after a holiday, on a Friday, afternoon window slot, coming after a bye, two very emotional games Notre Dame's just played going into the bye with Clemson, obviously everything wrapped into that. And then the animosity between Notre Dame, Boston College, that, their our backup quarterback was their starting quarterback. So that was some heavy physical and emotional stuff the last couple weeks. The bye was needed to get healthy on defense. I think we looked a little sluggish against BC as a residual from playing Clemson. So now you enter this bye. Notre Dame's in a fantastic position, exactly where you want to be. I don't think it's likely you're going to trip up against Syracuse and Wake. So this is it. This is it. So everybody's on high alert. It's a offense that could sneak up on you and pile up points quick. Coming out of the bye makes me nervous. It's just my Notre Dame anxiety, okay? So all those factors come into play here, and it's just check all the boxes of John's anxiety when things are going well for Notre Dame. This checks them all. Just knock them all out.
Well, I get it, John. And especially when you consider the opponent, and you touched upon this, they're definitely a wild card. So they're not one of the best teams in the country. No, they're not. Notre Dame is rock solid, consistent, sound in all phases, both sides of the football. But this team, if they get a decent performance out of their defense, and not even necessarily from a yardage standpoint or making a ton of stops, but if they get a couple turnovers, if they have athletes on that side of the ball, if they can make a couple plays that change field position, get a turnover, those sorts of things, and then just let the offense do what they do. And again, they're facing probably the best. Yeah, they're facing the best defense that they've seen all year. But if they still are able to just have a lights out day when they can pitch it and catch it as well as anyone, that's sometimes difficult to defend unless you can get to that guy and get him off his platform.
Yeah, and I actually think this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I actually think the fact that they've lost a couple times increases the danger here for Notre Dame. It's not like a top 10 matchup or something like that. They're in a position with a couple losses where I don't think the ACC title game's really in play for them. You're playing spoiler, and it's just the perfect setup of this can skyrocket us into the next level, show we could beat a team like this, help the recruiting momentum Mac Brown already is gaining. So that's definitely the case. Now, I mean, they're scoring 43 a game. Notre Dame's scoring 36 a game. So they're in the same ballpark there. How they score, I think, is a little different with their offensive approach. Where I think you're looking at is, like you said, defensively. They're giving up an average of 31 a game. Notre Dame's giving up 16 and a half. So from Notre Dame's perspective, especially defensively, you got to make them earn everything. You can't have guys getting behind you, giving up big chunks. Make them earn it all the way down the field, and then try and keep them out of the end zone.
Got John Kennedy on the line from Always Irish to talk up Notre Dame. Big game coming up this weekend against North Carolina. And actually, I had the stakes much higher, both finishing 9-2. So this was my preseason projection, was a 9-2 game, or a 9-2 record out of both teams, and playing this one. You're missing your starting center, Jared Patterson. So what kind of problems does that pose?
Okay, well, see, that's another thing. When I went over my list of anxieties, this is one I didn't add. Now we're down 2 offensive linemen. Starter Tommy Kramer had an appendectomy, so he had to have a minor surgery for his appendix. So now Notre Dame's down 2 starting offensive linemen for this game. I think what worries you is if one of them's a center, that's always a little freaky about snap counts and getting the timing right, mesh. Just that makes me a little nervous. Notre Dame's O-line according to a lot of folks, where that depth's going to be tested. Now, the good thing is this was coming over a bye, so you did have some extra time to try and work that out. But that offensive line was rolling. I mean, just guys that have played together forever. They had things really, really going strong. To be down 2, it's going to be a test. And I do expect offensive coordinator Tommy Rees to test this out early. Are we still going to be able to run the ball as effectively as we've been doing now that we're down these 2 guys, or do we have to adjust? So from a personnel perspective, that's definitely something you're looking for, and you're hoping to see noticeable or no drop off. I don't know how realistic that is or not. But I expect Notre Dame to continue to be who they are offensively. I don't believe Notre Dame wants to get in a shootout up and down the field with North Carolina. They would prefer to play their game, run it, control the clock, eat up 7 or 8 minutes, get the ball in the end zone, get a few stops. Like, North Carolina is going to score. Like, they're going to score. You just can't let it get away from you. Howell gained some momentum. We've had a few fumbles that are atypical the last couple weeks. All those little things, and you could be in a real dogfight down in Carolina.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we all love each and every day with the best bloggers, broadcasters, writers in the industry, discussion, debate, analysis. So lock it on in. Give us a subscription. As soon as you do, hit that bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live. I got John Kennedy on the line, always Irish, always fired up, always passionate about the Irish. Okay. This is the best Notre Dame defense since 2012.
Okay, I think statistically that defense gave up under 10 points a game overall that year. It was like 9.6 points a game. They didn't play a lot of teams with a lot of firepower in 2012. A lot of our traditional teams we played were down. We had Michigan that year, USC, and they weren't what they usually are. So statistically, points given up, that one's going to give up less in 2012. This defense is way more athletic, way faster. And the other thing is the depth. They never had this kind of depth before. They kind of feel like, especially up front, they can rotate guys in to get after the passer and not have a drop off there. But physically speaking, and speed and length in these spaces, this defense is light years ahead of 2012. But if you want to talk about points, that one was given up under 10 a game. But physically speaking, I would take this one all day, every day over the 2012 version.
And it doesn't seem like that long ago, but we're just playing a different brand of football today than we were. Defenses aren't going to give up 8 and 9 points a game, regardless of how good they are. Nobody's doing that.
Yeah, and even Notre Dame giving up 16 and a half this year in 2020, that's great. We had a few games in a row where giving up single digits. Like, that's pretty good no matter who you're playing. I do think if I had to identify an area of concern defensively, it's one that lines up great with what North Carolina and Howell like to do. 40 points against Clemson. They're talented. That kid's young, but has a great arm. 31 against BC. So looking at that back end, you got Kyle Hamilton, who's an NFL safety, just unbelievable. We need these other guys to make sure they're where they need to be, looking where they need to look, and doing what they need to do. You just got to make North Carolina earn it. You cannot put together a methodical drive yourself and then let them score in 2 plays. The boat race thing is bad for Notre Dame. You don't want to get into that.
Talking Notre Dame, they've got a big one in Chapel Hill against the Heels coming up on Friday here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please lock it in. All right. For quite some time, Notre Dame, if we go back to the end of the Lou Holtz era, since then, it's not been what we would expect of Notre Dame football by and large. There have been certainly teams that have jumped up. Then Brian Kelly takes over. He upgrades the situation there. But precisely here in the last 3 years, since that downer in 2016, you get to a college football playoff. Even last year's an 11-2. And then we see what the team's doing here. And it doesn't have the feel of, and I've always credited Notre Dame with scheduling tougher than anyone. It may not play out that way every year, but it's tougher scheduling in terms of a concept and approach than anybody. But if you get some teams like you did in 2018, USC was down, Stanford was down, Virginia Tech, Florida State, then it becomes a softer schedule. But I get the feeling that this program has arrived. It's just not cycling through where we've got a really strong senior class, the schedule lightened up on us, things fell into place, therefore we're in it. No, this program is legitimately in it now, probably year to year.
I think I'm not ready to go that far, but they're closer. Okay. And there's certain things that I look at that make me think that. Number one is Kelly there's like 3 different Brian Kellys. There was the ramp up in the beginning leading to the 2012 championship game where it was men versus boys physically against Alabama. After that, we had some buddy system hires and things kind of got a little laxed in strength and conditioning, whatever. And it bottomed out in 2016 in the worst year we've seen forever. To Brian Kelly's credit, I had a checklist of things I needed him to do. He did every single one of them. Fired his buddies, got real coordinators in there, revamped the recruiting operation, totally renovated strength and conditioning, nutrition, all those kind of areas the best programs were at. He did all that. And over the last 3 years, we've lost a handful of games, and they're all the biggest games on the schedule. So for Brian Kelly to get that big game monkey off his back against Clemson, Lawrence or no Lawrence, their defensive players or not, beating that number 1 team and getting that asterisk off him, it's a big deal. And I know people downplay it because Lawrence wasn't there. It was still the number 1 team, and we haven't won a game like that in 27 years. So for him to show that he could get to that level, I think is what makes you start think maybe we're turning a corner here. And what I liked about the Clemson situation was it wasn't a fluky win. Notre Dame played physical and tough on both lines. And that's something you really look for when you're seeing where a program's at. So for us to be able to hold them to 30-something yards rushing, hold up physically, that's a really good indicator. So from here, you're going to have whatever happens the rest of this year in hopefully the ACC title game. See how you're going to play Clemson in that game. But at a minimum, that one win against Clemson's already paying dividends in recruiting for 21. And I think it's going to be even more in play in 22. So I think there's some credibility gained here. There's still a lot to prove, but they're getting closer. They're getting closer.